This is a quick video to show the integration between CA Service Virtualization and CA Test Data Manager. Now, in modern day application development, testers and developers need constant access to environments in order to execute their tests. However, when testing composite applications, the inability to access these missing or unavailable or sometimes even unfinished components causes huge delays. TDM can address some of these issues by creating virtual data needed when service virtualization is emulating these missing or unavailable components. What we're able to do is mirror realistic request and response traffic using versatile data generation functions. Now, what I've got in front of me at the moment is service virtualization with a simple virtual service running. Now, if we look behind this and start to send some requests against it, you can see we're getting some basic responses back. Now, if I go into my request editor and just change this to be web app 1, run my request, I'm getting a response. Now, what I'd like to use TDM to do is populate these to have email addresses, first name, last name, and so on, so we're getting some more realistic traffic and more diverse traffic. So within TDM, a couple of things have already been set up. I've created a little project called Web Services, and if I go down to configuration, I have a connection to Service Virtualization set up as well. So if I go over to Objects, what I need to do is create a data generator. And this data generator is going to be used to create the new request response pairs to work with. So click Create Generator. I now need to give this a name. So the first request response pair that I'm going to be looking at is called getUser. So we'll call this getUser, and then click Save. That's ready for us to work with. The next thing we need to do is bring in the request and response pair metadata for us to start utilizing that in the generation routine. So if we click Register New Objects, the object type that we would like to work with is request and response pair. It's for getUser, and we'd like to take the CA Service Virtualization request, and also we would like to take the response. Now we're going to go and register that, and it brings in some initial metadata, and what we're then going to do from there is create some derived tables. And what that means is we're going to go through a shredding process to create a series of tables in SQL Server that we can then use to inject data into to drive the virtual service data generation. So click Create and Register Tables. What this is going to start to do is build some tables in a little SQL database, and then we can utilize that a little bit. Now that's complete, you can see the tables that have been created. If I go into my SQL Server database and just look at my Shredder database and expand the tables, you can see we've created a series of tables in the back end as well. Now what I'm going to do from here is bring some of the information from my example request and responses into the generator. So if I click Import, just give this a document ID of 10 and a request response pair link ID of 10. This just makes it easier to find particular request and response pairs when we're working with a lot. And I'd like to use the files that I used a little bit earlier on, so the request and response that we initially looked at. And then I'd like to import that directly into my getUser data generator that I created. So if I click Import, this will send the job off to import. Take a look at that, and you can see it's completed. So if I now go to my data generator, click getUser, I can pick all of those tables, and they'll have a base layer of data in to work with. Now what I'm going to do within here is click the relational edit icon. So what I can do is click Make All Children References and Make All Parents Default. This will just help us tie everything together. So when we're generating data into multiple SQL Server tables, when we go through the export process, we know which particular areas need to be connected to each other. So if I click OK, we'll get a snapshot of what relational edits are going to be made. Click OK, and then we'll go and update our generator. So I'm going to quickly pick all of those tables again, and I can now start to parameterize this. So we go down, I've got a request get user table, and this holds the username. So this is going to be the username we use when we're firing our request. And I wouldn't like to keep this static. I'd like to click on this paintbrush icon to bring up the data painter and parameterize this a little bit. So there are lots of functions within TDM. I'm going to stick with something relatively simple and remove the number string and just put in a function called next, which takes the next available number starting from 0. So all of my new web app IDs will start at 1. So we insert that. That's one function created, and I just need to make sure that the response is also using the same login ID. So if we click the paintbrush again to bring up the data painter, delete that, I can then pick a column, so that's the request get user, pick the username, and that just means that each time we create these pairs, they're going to have the same login ID in them. I also want to make this a little bit more interesting. I want to create a last name, a first name, and an email. So if I click in last name, rather than using the data painter, I can actually just access a function directly. So I want to use a function called random list of values, and I would like to pull a value from a seed list, and this will be from a seed list called last names. And I want to make sure that none of these are null, so I'm always getting a value when I create these. Now, I'll quickly do the same for first name, so function rand lov, and then pick first name, and again I don't want any of these to be blank, so I'll put that as 0, and then I'm going to jump back into the data painter for the email, because what I want to do is combine a couple of these. So I'm going to take my response return first name dot last name at ca.com. So if I go ahead and validate that, it'll give me a realistic email address that will also be linked to the first name and the last name that I'm creating. So we'll go ahead and insert that. So that's my data generator finished. Now what I'd like to do is go back to my getUser object, and I'd like to export this out. So if I click export and just say I'd like to publish some new data, so I'd like to create 10 new request response pairs for getUser, and once you've done that, could you go ahead and update the virtual service so it links straight back into that web services model. And we click publish and export. It's going to submit that job, and it's going to submit what we call a group job, which will do a publish and then it'll do an export into Service Virtualization. Now that's running. Refresh one more time and now it's complete. Just go and expand that a little bit. You can see it's done a publish and then it's done an export data out to the virtual service. Now if we quickly look in our SQL window and look at our getUser response and just query the top 1000 rows, you'll see that we've actually created some data there. And if we go into our response return, select 1000 there, you'll see we've actually got some realistic data in there as well. Now just to check that's actually worked, if we go back into our little test to make sure that we are bringing back the correct responses, we use web app 1 in this instance. If we now go and run this against our virtual endpoint, it's bringing back our first name and our last name, and it's also bringing back that email address as well. So just a quick video to show how easy it is to integrate both Test Data Manager and Service Virtualization to create realistic request response pairs to mirror live traffic. Thank you.